Everybody settle down. We've just had a beautiful mindfulness and kind of mindset shift presentation that was given by the beautiful Valentine. So I hope that those of you who are here are in a very nice Zen state. And those of you who were not here before will leave here in a very Zen state with a huge amount of reflection as well. Because probably some of the things that we're going to say today are not going to keep you in a Zen state, but let's hope that somehow we can ground ourselves as we deal with the reality check that's before us. You're now in the session, if you don't know where you are, that is being led by the Club of Rome. We're talking about transformational economics meets transformational leadership, and I am the co-president of the Club of Rome, and it's a real honor to have you here with me today also, because we have such incredible speakers. And I'd really like to thank them in advance for being here, not necessarily in the blue zone. Let's call this the new blue zone. What we want to talk about is the importance of systems change. It's the importance of understanding that actually, as we celebrate or commiserate the 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth, which is this year, that we think very clearly as to why an incredible book that was published 50 years ago was not heeded by more decision makers. Why is it that actually those incredible scientists and economists that did the system dynamic modeling in those days, the Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows team, with all of that incredible thinking, understanding that there were limits to the growing population, if it continued all the way through to this period in time, we would have a series of very clear social and environmental tipping points. And so here we are in 2022, facing some of the greatest challenges of our time: a pandemic, the COVID crisis, the climate crisis, and the conflict crisis that is right on our doorstep, many of us who live in Europe today, but also the conflicts that are happening across the globe, in particular on the African continent. Those 3 C's were not predicted in the scenarios that were indicated through the Limits to Growth, but they were perceived to be possibilities, because that's what scenarios do. They give you different options. The option could have been to stop the continuous growth in the 1970s, to take into consideration the need to understand extractive economies and the shift from an extractive economy into going beyond GDP and the production quotient as the only driver. But that didn't happen in the 70s. It didn't happen in the 80s. It didn't happen in the 90s. The perpetual desire for growth continued. And after many, many publications from the Club of Rome, many thought leadership pieces, and all the incredible science that we've seen from scientists, including the work by Johan and others around the planetary boundaries, here we are today at a COP where we are actually questioning 1.5 degrees. So I'm hoping that this session is a reality check. It's a reminder to all of us that we have the science. We already had most of the evidence 50 years ago. We knew that we had to shift from an extractive economy into a new economic model to actually address the way in which we engage with nature, the way in which we use materials, and the way in which we take into consideration people in our economy. But that did not happen. So it's very important at this moment in time to take a step, to reflect, and to think, okay, what is our responsibility now as we leave Egypt and as we go home? What is our responsibility as we think through what the panelists are going to say today? And how are we going to take that message back with us? Because if we come here or in the UAE for the next COP, and there aren't some serious proposals that come out of this COP, then I would say we are 100% complicit with leaders who are actually in total denial. And we cannot be, because we know the science is there, we know the evidence is there, we know the new economic models are there. So my challenge to you today is, let's be part of the future that we want to see. Let's be those transformational leaders. Let's be those transformational thinkers. Let's be those transformational actors. And let's engage in a new economy, which is what we're going to discuss today, which is an economy that is for all. And that is why we published our book, Earth for All, A Survival Guide for Humanity. So I think we have a short video. May I just see a hand if we're ready to actually show the video of Earth for All, A Survival Guide for Humanity. And while that video is playing, I will ask then our next presenters to come up in a little bit so that we can start off, because some of them need to actually go quite quickly. So please.
It is a group of scientists, humanists, educators.
It's irritating that humanity has not listened to us, but they haven't.
The warning bells were there already 50 years ago. The big difference is that now we truly are in the midst of the crises.
We are much, much closer to potentially catastrophic outcomes.
Now we have a short opportunity where everything is up in the air.
We thought it was the time to now reassess to see what does science tell us today and how does the future look like the next 50 years.
We have to change the story. We have to provide a plausible, coherent, consistent, and also science-based and numbers-backed story that people find more attractive than business as usual. We have one scenario called too little, too late. And then the other one is where we succeed in putting all those possibilities together.
We are proposing 5 turnarounds paid for by the 10% richest people in the world.
If we put in place the 5 turnarounds that we talk about, the focusing on inequality, the focus on poverty, the focus on empowerment, and then food and energy as the 2 key resources that will keep us alive as we're faced with some of these ongoing crises, then we actually could get ourselves out of this mess.
And the interesting thing with these 5 turnarounds is that they can be scaled from communities to cities to sectors, nations, regions, and then globally. So that's what we were looking for, like a fractal set of fractals that escalate or percolate down from the global economic system all the way down to specific communities.
We need to start with redressing, making sure that the solution is fair, is perceived as fair by a democratic majority. Unless we do so, we won't get a solution.
It's critical we talk about poverty because the poorest in societies are the most vulnerable and face the biggest risks, as we can see with the flooding in Pakistan, and we can see with the food crisis in sub-Saharan Africa. It's absolutely critical that we use this as an opportunity to spur sustainable economic development.
Currently, a large part of the world is materially, financially, economically insecure. And it is true when they're working, whether they're paid or unpaid, and it is true when they are not working. So a universal pension that guarantees affordable life is an essential part of this. So many women across the world, their lives are dominated by the unpaid work they do. If you want healthy, sustainable, viable societies, the importance of recognizing the contribution of women and the rights of women is absolutely essential. It is really about ensuring that societies are sustainable, that social reproduction occurs, and it's about ensuring that the rights of half the world's population are met adequately. Women must be given the freedom to make their own life choices.
In the food system, we would see a rapid change towards more logistics that reduce the unnecessary food waste and food loss so that we have food security.
I'm absolutely convinced that the Ukraine war will help us to accelerate the transition away from oil, coal, and natural gas.
So we could see an energy democracy where local sources, microgrids, local areas don't have to rely so much on the global fossil energy system.
What we're facing is not an environmental crisis. It's a crisis of security, of stability, of prosperity and equity. And that's what Earth for All really brings forward.
So the overall object of the latest report is basically to continue the fight.
If sufficient mobilization occurs, and if the demand for major changes in economic strategy gets loud enough, then we can actually achieve a major turnaround.
I'm very optimistic that we are going to see a very, very rapid transformation. But the question is, will it be fast enough?
Now we need to come together and we need to share this image that a giant leap is fully possible.
That comes back to a series of different structural shifts that we will have to make across the globe in order to ensure that we have truly an Earth for all.
So we finished with "We truly have an Earth for all." And so our tagline, and please do hashtag it, tag it, put it out in your social media. There is no excuse for continuing to blunder along the same path. We know where we need to go. It is time that we all set our compasses in the same direction. It is an Earth for all. And I would like to bring up the next panel, please, to join me. First, starting with Sheila Patel, who is working with slum dwellers around the world. And actually this morning, we launched an incredible initiative together called Roof Over Our Heads. Truly an innovator at all levels of community. So Sheila, thank you for joining us, a real leader in the area of grassroots change. I'd also like to have Johan Rockström. I don't think Johan needs much of an introduction, but if ever any of you don't know who Johan is actually the director, first of all, of the Potsdam Institute, but most well known for the planetary boundaries work and the incredible work in climate sciences. So Johan, please, and of course an author with me of Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity. And then I would like to also ask to have Naoko Ishii, who's also a member of the Club of Rome, director of the Center for Global Commons at Earth for All, as well as part of our panel. Naoko, please. And then last but definitely not least is Raisa. Raisa, who has been working with us off and on for quite some time as the Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, Youth for Nature. We're trying to get everyone's badges off so that they can actually speak properly. Raisa, thank you for joining us. And as always, we believe that the youth voice is not a token voice, but it's part of the vision of change. So Raisa, thank you for joining me. So I'm going to start with you, Sheila, because I know also that you need to go. And you are in particular doing a lot of work for the moment at the Resilience Hub, which is why you need to go. But I would like you to unpack a little bit this relationship that Johan and I and many of us who have been writing have been talking about between the social tipping points and the environmental tipping points. And the work that you're doing, obviously, in net zero, not just carbon, but net zero poverty, net zero pandemics, enhancing and empowering women, and making sure that actually the role of women as real solution providers is recognized. How do we shift our economy to reflect this and the way in which our leaders engage with the economy? Put it up close to your mouth.
So, now can you hear me? Okay. So thank you for inviting me in such an illustrious company. I'm very honored to be here with all of you. I work with an organization called Slum Dwellers International, and we work in 33 countries and 200 cities with people who live informally. And we find that we are ignored, we are marginalized, and we are invisible. And therefore, our aspirations, our ability to survive even before the pandemic and now worse off after that and in this extreme climate situation, is something that we want to be part of the solution rather than constantly be ignored and left behind. And I think that in many ways, we hope that the solutions we find to our own habitat, for the food we need, for the lives we want our children to lead, will make us critical stakeholders in the transformation that we all aspire to have. We don't want to be invisible. We want people like you to work with us to bring us science, to bring us technology that we now need to look at when we upgrade and build our homes to deal with extreme weather. We need to understand new systems we need to have in the post-COVID period when we have lost our jobs, when there isn't enough food to eat, and where more and more transport in cities is not designed for poor people. It is designed for rich people to move from cars to public transport, making it impossible for us to use this for ourselves. So our important message here is there are already over 1 billion people, at least in the global south, who live in this condition. And we are told that another 1.5 billion will come into cities as climate refugees till you come to the state of the world which we all hope it will be. But before that, there will be climate refugees which will triple the number of people who live in informal settlements, because we know that poor people cannot go anywhere else but in the informal world. And so what we find is already poor people face evictions because the places where they stay are not acceptable to the city, because the city isn't planned to include them. We're talking about building material that is never available in the format and at the cost that we want. We have no access to amenities and services that all of us sitting here take for granted. No electricity, no water supply, no sewer systems, no place to defecate with dignity. These are all things that human beings need, that we take for granted, that this 1 billion plus people don't have. So we want to do all that within the new constraints that we all want to impose on ourselves. We don't want to say that because we don't have a footprint, we can do whatever we want. We want to be responsible. So we look out for all of you who have these innovations, who have resources, who have ideas, who have technology, who are in government, to work with us, not for us or about us. Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you, Sheila. I'm just going to ask you a quick closing question before you need to go. So what I'm hearing from you is that the economy of the future, to be truly transformative, first of all, has to be properly planned for the people. And we know, and Naoko knows as well, having worked also on the financial side, that the over-financialization of our economy has totally forgotten the role of people, planet, and prosperity. For you to be a transformational leader and a new economy, do you feel that then it's a planning issue more than anything else? Or is it a poverty eradication issue? What are the key nuggets that we need to react in right now as we are in this decade of action, both poverty, planning, and?
I think the most important thing is inclusion. When you can never plan something if you don't count people. If you don't count everybody who lives in your site, then your planning is half-baked. And today, the world is planning only for 20% of the population on this earth. The rest of us, the indigenous communities, the fisher folk, you look at all the people who service you, we have forgotten them. They are invisible. During COVID, we celebrated them. They said they brought us everything we want. Now we've already forgotten them. Nobody thinks about them. So we want to make a lot of noise about that. And we want everybody to hear, and we want all of you to do that too.
Thank
We're
you,
not
Sheila.
going to sit quietly anymore.
No, neither are we. So thank you for that. As I said at your launch this morning, I think there's a few key points we all need to realize. One is we are all as vulnerable as the most vulnerable link. We think we're not climate refugees. We think we have roofs over our head now. Tomorrow, we could not have all of those things, and therefore absolutely need to also be included. So let's realize that this is about being a collective voice for an Earth for all, exactly as you say. The other is we have to use we have to be and show that our leaders are accountable, and that is fundamental. And then the third is that we need to bring in that care economy, that supposed parallel economy that is so fundamental to our economy. And this is something, Johan, that we talked about so much around the social tipping points, the fact that it is the care economy, what is most essential in our economy, that actually needs to be brought to the forefront and given a place as a fundamental part of the economy.
And not just left aside because it's not monetized.
Exactly. Exactly. So thank you very much for all that you do. And you are now liberated to go back to your other panel. Thank you.
So much. Thank you.
So I'm now going to turn to you, Johan, and to reflect a little bit on what Sheila has just said, but also in the video you clearly mentioned that we're now not only facing an environmental crisis, but we're actually facing a crisis of security, a crisis of stability, prosperity, and equity. So can you reflect a little bit on that link between climate and poverty and the discussions we've been having also on biodiversity? What are the feedback loops? How do we ensure that we do truly show leadership in these areas?
Yeah, thanks, Sandrine. And let me start by just giving all my full-hearted support to Sheila and her call for dignity and respect to all indigenous communities in the world. And just to say that I think we have very strong evidence that we have to go even beyond her call for noise and listening to the voices from below, because we are now at risk of destabilizing all life support systems on Earth. We are actually at risk of destabilizing the entire planet, which means that in my mind, and I think it's fair to say, Sandrine, in our mind, in the Earth for All, the ultimate definition of justice today is actually to hand over a livable planet to all human beings currently on planet Earth, but also in the future on planet Earth. So there is much more than just listening to communities from below. We need some really hard, really rapid transitions from above as well, and put leaders in the world accountable for their decisions. So there is something at the planetary scale that we today have to consider. But then coming to your question on the multiple pressures we're under, I'd like to just point you to New York Times today, where I'm publishing together with Tad Homer-Dixon, professor in Canada, a paper, an article, putting forward the risk that we're moving towards what we call a polycrisis. That just as we point out in the Earth for All, that we have multiple parallel crises at the same time interacting. The pandemic, the geopolitics, the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, the crisis of poverty and inequity. And this is a cocktail that can take us to points of no return with regards to instability of societies at large regions, that will start to really tip over into potentially unmanageable trajectories. And I think, Sandrine, your point about us all being in this together is really fundamental. And this is an enormously frustrating part of this whole negotiations here in Sharm el-Sheikh, that we're still handling this as a north-south divide. As we are causing it in the north, impacting the south, as if the rich countries are not impacted and having responsibility to not only be a predominant part of solving the enormous crisis we're in, but also to recognize that, for example, as one piece of statistics that is generally just put aside, that the ground zero today on planet Earth, where actually the environmental conditions for life is changing fastest, is in Europe. Can you imagine that the frequency of heat waves, the frequency of extreme droughts, the whole temperature rise is occurring twice as fast in that rich part of the world. The only reason why it's not hitting so hard is that there's so much money around that these are societies that can sort of say buy their way out, at least on the short term. But I think we need to call that out very clearly in the way we address the scientific narrative on the risks we're facing. And then just finally to say that if we're talking about transformation and acceleration and scaling a transition towards a safe and just future for humanity on Earth, remember that that is not utopia and it's not theory. The Earth for All is a survival guide which is much more than just academics getting together to put something on paper. We have some real tools in that toolbox. Get rid of the $4 trillion of subsidies to fossil fuels and do it now. Get a moratorium on all investments in new fossil fuel infrastructure and do it now. Put a global price on carbon and do it now, and handle that in a way that feeds back into investing in dignity and equity and empowerment. You know how much money we generate already today through carbon pricing in the 35 countries that have a carbon price? $84 billion per year. That's quite good. Quite a good,
revenue stream.
So if you have transparent governance, if you have functional societies and institutions, you can actually reinvest that into building the transformation that the Earth for All is proposing. So I would also argue that Sandrine is right, that this is not only a call for action, it's a call for realism and it's a call for implementation.
Thanks, Johan. And you know what does drive me around the bend is exactly what you've just said. Not only do we have the tools in the toolbox, which we have shown through Earth for All, we've done the system dynamic modeling, we've stress tested it with economists and thought leaders from across the globe, but on top of it, a lot of it is not brain science. I mean, the fact of the matter is we've got the evidence, we've got the science, we've got the tools. We know what we need to do, even just within our own research centers and the way in which the different institutes have worked together. We've talked about debt cancellation. In fact, we now see that the IMF is doing the same. We've put all of the special drawing rights also on the table. There are some countries that have already implemented well-being economics, most of them led by women, by the way, but they are being implemented and they're moving forward. So a lot of this is already being done. And this is why I want to turn now to you also, Naoko, because I think this is really the frustration. As Johan says, it is not going to cost as much upfront than we think, but it'll cost us a lot more if we don't act now. 2 to 3% GDP per annum is what we costed these 5 turnarounds to be. So if we look at the fact that we have most of the evidence and we have most of the solutions, you actually, in our last net zero dialogue and race to zero dialogue with Tim Jackson, there was an interaction around what kind of transformation would you see as essential for the economy. And you spoke about breaking through that dichotomy between human and nature. And Mampela Ramphele, my co-president, would call that embracing Ubuntu, because Ubuntu means you are nature and nature is you. We are not separate from nature. Where are we now in some of those discussions? And put the microphone straight up. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandrine. Hello? Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, that dialogue was already 3 years ago, and I still do remember this dichotomy between nature and human economics. So the reason I mentioned that is that the current economic system is in collision with natural or planetary Earth system. And the problem is that we have a scientific evidence. We have this hard stop of 1.5 degree. And without that our future, particularly that the intergenerational justice, will not be met. So it's extremely important for us to how to transform our current economic system so that not only us, but also the future generation can really live within the planetary boundaries in a much more in harmony. What's wrong with the current economic system is that, already mentioned by previous speakers, our system doesn't really value that nature or the society or the community, and there's an cohesion we used to have. So how we can really incorporate those value of the natural capital, maybe capital is a bad word, but nature, but also society and the human cohesion. One thing which I have been a little bit happy for this week is that despite of those difficult conversations of the 1.5 still alive or not, there are a lot of recognition, widely shared recognition that the current economic system is not working. It needs to be reformed. It needs to be, it is breaking down. So that wide recognition, we can actually start working on that, building the building blocks to really reform the current economic system. That made me a little bit more optimistic out of this COP that quite a number of willing partners are talking about how to value the nature, that how to synthesize those efforts, how to do more like a standardization, how to create international norms to move forward. So it's a good thing to see. The challenge is that all those great initiative ideas yet to adapt to the shift the market and shift the system. And we really need to go much faster and much deeper to shift the economic system so that we can reward those guardians on the ground. It's mostly smallholder farmers and indigenous people and the community people who are actually doing a lot about the safeguarding global commons, but also penalize that the institutions who are harming those capitals, nature and then the society. So a lot of work needs to be done going forward to how to shift this incentive and disincentive so that, at some point those efforts do really add up to transform the current economic system.
Thank you so much, Naoko. And you've been such a big part of the institutional frameworks as well. I mean, both also working in the Ministry of Finance and being so important in Japan, but also through the GEF and the way in which you're looking at funding. So it's so important to have you on board, someone who really understands that actually we need to embed nature in our economies and in financial structures. And coming back to both what you and Johan have said, and coming now to you, Raisa, 3 years ago, Johan and myself and others published the Planetary Emergency Plan, as you well know. And within that, Johan was insistent, and I remember this conversation, to put in language that shows the feedback loops between biodiversity and climate change. Now, we're going into a CBD COP, and we're not seeing those feedback loops between the negotiators, between the negotiations, and between the policy, which is absolutely ridiculous because they're completely interdependent. And this was 3 years ago. It was also at a time when a very young, Swedish, short woman, young woman, came out and started screaming at all of us in a very calm but insistent voice that we were not listening, and that was Greta. We published our Planetary Emergency Plan and started talking about the planetary emergency 1 month before Greta hit the road. And I think probably Johan influenced that a little bit. But in any case, what is important is that since then, we have seen incessant, unbelievable young women come to the forefront, like yourself and others who have been leading in the streets incredible movements. And the Youth for Nature and the Youth for Climate has been phenomenal. But I want you to reflect a little bit as to how do you come here now and feel, also having been with us last year, do you see progress? Do you see us going backwards? What is your call to all of us, not only in terms of the role of nature, but also as a youth representative?
I'm going to stand up if it's okay.
Please.
I feel like that the body and the blood flows better when we are standing. By the way, hi everyone. It's so nice seeing you here today. Your nice faces, your eyes open. This is super great. We are here, we are alive. This is amazing. So I would like to start today with a little story. So I spent the last 2 months in Brazil, which was very stressful because we were having elections. So hot tip for you, don't go to a country when the elections are happening because it can be very stressful for you. But the point being that I decided to buy a suitcase for my parents because they are going to go on a very nice trip and I wanted to give them this gift. And it was a very nice milestone for me because I bought this and I didn't need to worry so much about my financial situation. And I was so happy that I could give this gift to my parents. And this brought me so much joy, this brought me so much happiness, and I even slept better that day because I was so happy that I could give this gift. And I tell you this story to show, and because we are making so many calls today with my fellow guests in this panel and Sandrine, I want to call you to also realize and understand the role of our bodies in the economy. So that I call for an embodied solution, and I call for an embodied experience of our economic transformation. The current economic system is everywhere. It's how we live, it's how many of us are surviving, it determines our rest cycles, it determines the clothes we are wearing, it determines the food we eat, the food we find tasty, the things we like doing. It's in our blood, it's in microplastics going all around our bodies. It's basically going everywhere in our psychology, and even in my voice, in my tone of voice, the fact that I'm speaking in English to all of you now today. So the economic system is embodied in us. And it's also because we are nature, and drawing back from what you were just saying, this embodiment, or the fact that we are embodied, also embodies in nature in that sense that the atmosphere has tons of CO2 nowadays, and this is also a consequence of the capitalist system. So, by the way, my name is Raiza, like Sandrine just introduced you. I represent here Youth for Nature, which is an organization mobilizing youth for nature and climate solutions, so bridging these links between biodiversity and climate that you were talking so well. And one of our main roles is to empower young people to be meaningful parts of the economy. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking the microphone out of my mouth. Yes, and some things about me personally, because it's always nice to get to know your speakers also on a personal level. I consume a lot of mass media. I love dogs, I love cats, I love animals in general, and I also love cooking vegan food. So today, when I'm talking about the embodied nature of our economic system, I'm calling you to also see the embodied nature of the solutions that we are proposing today. So the Earth for All framework zooms out and brings these systemic aspects that are very important. So some of the tools that you mentioned are erasing debt for low-income countries. We also talk about progressive taxation and education for girls and women. And it's very important that we also recognize the role of storytelling, of arts, of knowledge sharing, of capacity building in this economic changing. Because when we use art and when we use storytelling, we are essentially bringing back, and we are essentially thinking, and we are essentially changing with our bodies the economic system. And this is what I expect to do with you today, and this is the journey that I invite you to reflect. I know it can be very scary because we don't know how it's going to feel like when we are eating different food, or when we are having different types of relationships with our community members, and when we are living in this world, shared world, in a different way. But I invite you to brace this fear and come with me and come with us for this journey, with our bodies, with our flesh, with nature, bringing all of this at the center of the discussion.
Thank you, Raisa. So we are embodied nature, and it's true, our economies are embodied. And as we now move into the next session, I'd like to ask all of you a question, actually, for reflection. What for you, then, taking into consideration what we've just said, are exciting examples of systemic shifts already underway that you've come across during COP? And I think many of us have gone to some incredible sessions. In fact, in one of the last sessions I was at, there seems to be a real dichotomy between all of the sessions that are in the blue zone and the negotiations. Because we hear so many incredible solutions, but not only do we hear the embodiment of the solutions, we also hear the embodiment of the pain. And the fact that the pain has allowed us to arise and to truly find ways to do things differently. And yet there seems to be no pain in the negotiations. No one's ready to actually figure out how we rise from this pain. Instead, they're using the pain as an excuse not to go forward. And we know that it's actually total short-termism and mostly about profit for only a few, not for many. So can I ask, and I don't know, Laura, if you're here, if we do have the question of the Mentimeter. Yes, so share excitings. If you could quickly go into, and if you go back, I think we need to, there we go. So use the QR code. Does everybody have the QR code? Can you go into the Mentimeter quickly and give some quick exciting examples that you've come across at COP? And as we do that, maybe some could shout some out. Any thoughts? As you're writing, why not express them?
Who wants a microphone?
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Don't introduce yourself, just shout it out, because it'll take too much time. I'm sorry. No, it's not working. Sorry? The promising role of finance.
I think unpacking hierarchical structures and looking at horizontal structures is an alternative.
Yep, thank you. Circularity. Decentralizing COP? Let's just talk about decentralization overall. And regionalizing COP framework, okay. Yeah. More women in leadership.
Disinvestment.
Inclusion of developing world voices. I hope you're also putting this in the Mentimeter, by the way. Sorry? Yeah. Showcasing efforts and data. Any others that we haven't heard? What about frontline communities? Putting them at the front line, making sure that they're actually empowered, as well as the indigenous people. Okay, I don't know if we already have some data on our Mentimeter. Can we show something, Nora? It's not on there. Or at least I can't see it. Okay, keep on going, guys. Come on, this needs to be interactive, yeah? The Youth Pavilion, I agree. If you haven't been to the Youth Pavilion, go to the Youth Pavilion. The role of youth. I mean, when we actually did several of our outreach events during the COVID time, working and discussing with youth, it was unbelievable to find that those that were on the front line in conflict zones and in COVID zones, making sure that people had access to food, to water, were youth and women. And yet they are the least empowered in our societies. Forest protection. Good. Well, actually, we just launched on Monday and Tuesday. I was lucky enough to facilitate the Leaders Pledge on forestry. And we have a new partnership, and actually Ghana and the United States are leading that partnership. There will be 6 working groups. They have done an unbelievable job in not only putting out pledges, but actually translating that into action on the ground in the last year. And for Indigenous people, 1.7 billion was promised, and 20% have already been given over the last year and will continue to be given. But we need to hold leaders accountable to translate those pledges into action. Okay, so I think we started to see some figures, Laura. I'm just going to say that and my microphone has gone. Thank you. Oh, it's come back. Wonderful. So I've lost my glasses, people, so you're going to have to help me because I can't see very well. What's that saying? And I'm looking up here, there's nothing. There's nothing, right? I'm not blind. See, I can see. I can see. Yeah, give me another one. Yes, turning the tide on plastics.
So there's an initiative called the Dorna Initiative. The Dorna Initiative, it brings structure to the informal waste pickers And in doing this, what it means is that the women that are doing the work get the payments directly. So it's not cash payments to men, it's direct payments to women who are doing the work. The Dorna initiative actually brings, it kind of makes it work for the people that are doing it and makes it work for the country. So this has only been going for like 2 years. I mean, my company's involved with this, and I only found out about it today. But my word, it's just amazing to see.
And your company's involved with it. Well, you got to get with the picture, my friend.
Well, I know. I work for Nestle, and there's an awful lot going on. We have to keep abreast of all of this stuff. But
well, bravo.
We've got a great team here. So
that's very good. And actually, you know what? That initiative was started in Morocco, where actually the Minister of Environment at the time, an amazing woman, put in place, working with all of the waste pickers, gave them a basket, made them part of the economy, gave them actually jobs, and ensured that not only the system got amplified, scaled up, but they all became not a part of the informal economy, but a part of the existing economy. And we need to stop with this informal, formal economy because it is absolutely not reflective. Absolutely. It's work that should be rewarded. I don't think our Mentimeter is working, or is it? Sophie, please tell us. Enlighten us.
It's manual.
It's manual.
So we have a vibrating child and youth pavilion, more inclusion of developing world frontline voices, joint leadership of COP, male and female, creating a compendium of data on the ground efforts in the global south, decentralizing COP via COP-X.
Yep.
Endorsement of knowledge in corporates, just energy transition partnerships, circular economy emphasize, and people can then vote on those suggestions.
Okay, fabulous. Well, listen, we've heard all those different suggestions. It's interesting that we heard about business knowledge. I would just like to say knowledge full stop, and in particular, make sure we recognize indigenous knowledge, community knowledge, local knowledge, so that we don't think that knowledge is just the knowledge of a certain part of society, but actually, in particular, those that are where they are and know exactly what needs to happen in their communities, because they're the ones who have been confronted with change. Yes?
And compensating Indigenous stewards for all the work they've been doing all these years, and finally giving them the resources to do that.
Absolutely, and in fact, during the leaders' discussions on forestry, what many of the African leaders said, and also Hindu, who's a good friend of many of us, said, she reminded us once again, this is about partnership. We are not victims. We actually don't want to be victimized. We know we have the solutions, and therefore we need to be brought into partnerships. Any aid must be aid that is worked through, co-designed with those that are on the ground, so we can actually really embrace that decentralized system. Okay, I think that we have gone through our new way of doing the Mentimeter, which was very interactive. I hope you agree. And we will now move on to our next session. But before we do that, a round of applause for our incredible panelists. Thank you so much. As we move into the next session, I want to bring in also some of the work that we've been doing, which I'm incredibly proud of at the European level, and trying to adapt some of that work at the international level. And that's called the Compass, the Systems Change Compass, which puts in place 10 key principles in order to transform our systems from a value lens and to come back to what is truly most essential. And we're going to have a very short video explaining the International Systems Change Compass, because what we did with Systemic and also with the Club of Rome, in particular my partner in crime, Janusz Potocznik, who was the former Commissioner of Research and Innovation and the former Commissioner of Environment, was to think through, okay, we have this incredible vision at the European level. It's called the European Green Deal. We're not as far as we need to be. We need to absolutely move into implementation. And to do that, we need to think through what then are the 10 key principles at a European level. But if we go ahead and apply the European Green Deal, what then are the impacts internationally? What does that look like in terms of trade? What does that look like in terms of material flows? What does that look like in terms of enhancing conflict? What does that look like in terms of continuing colonial behavior? Because what our African friends will tell us today, and they're absolutely right, on the one hand, you're saying we want to decarbonize the European economy, and oops, we made a big problem with Russia. We got dependent, total unholy alliance. We never should have done that. Robin, who's here and used to work with me at ECF, 10 years ago, we put forward a package on environment, climate, and energy that said, we can wean ourselves off gas, people, and in particular Russia, if we just put in place the buildings directives at the European level. Did anybody listen? Did anyone put actually energy efficiency at the forefront? Because we know that the best fuel is the fuel you don't use. But that didn't happen. So here we are now in a dependency cycle and actually pushing now our brothers and sisters in Africa to start mining more coal to send it back to Europe because we now have a dependency problem on Russia. And that is just not on. So that's what this International Systems Change Compass did, is start to unpack where are some of those tensions, where are dependencies in terms of value chains, and where can we actually shift those dependencies and think through the way in which we can be good citizens, good countries, as we work with the rest of the world. So I would like to show this video of the International System Change Compass, and I think that Janusz will also be in that video. Is the video ready, Laura?
Natural resources, and by that in the International Resource Panel we mean biomass, metals, non-metallic materials, and fossil fuels. So all mentioned are called materials and are extracted from the earth, as well as water and land, provide a foundation for the goods, for services and infrastructure that make up our current socioeconomic systems. Access to, use, and the benefits from natural resources have been in the human history always closely related to the level of achieved well-being, but also to stability, security, conflicts, wars. Just think about land, water, oil and gas, minerals, precious metals, and I could continue. Resource consumption is highly unequal. Measured in material footprints, high-income countries are per capita consuming 13 times more than low-income countries and are even increasing their resource import dependence. High-income regions like the European Union and North America have literally built their prosperity by using resources that have been imported from other parts of the world. From country data analysis, the resource consumption that we see in the high-income regions is already unsustainable today, since they belong to those countries overshooting planetary boundaries most and clearly living out of the safe operating space. It is also obvious that other regions will never be able to consume resources like the high-income countries do today in their take, make, dispose model of consumption, which is clearly unfair. Moreover, we know from IRP data that only extraction and processing of materials, so everything extracted from Earth, is responsible for 50% of global climate change, with the downstream economy responsible for the rest, and for over 90% of global land-related biodiversity loss and water stress. It is also behind 1/3 of the global air pollution, as well as water and land pollution. Unfortunately, we also know that the trends are alarming. Material use has tripled since 1970. So in the lifespan of many of us here today, and without transformative change, it will double again by 2060. What we need, it's a fundamentally new way to steward the resources available on the planet Earth, and to introduce new forms of international governance to protect and use resources in an efficient and socially just way. Standards and behavioral patterns linked to the current economic model were set by high-income countries, and as mentioned, the benefits of natural resource over exploitation substantially contributed to our well-being today. Thus, we are ethically bound to show the world that we are willing and able to change the reality created, and to lead the essential transition at home and globally. While the responsibility for the past is clear, responsibility for the future is of course joint and common. In the recent contribution for this COP titled Making Climate Targets Achievable, with the IRP co-chair Isabella Teixeira, we have identified 4 critical system shifts needed. First, redefine value. Measure economic success by how the economy is actually meeting human needs. Second, redefine sectors as systems. Instead of optimizing just for economic output, focus on systems that provide a societal function and therefore allow cross-sector innovation and shifts to more future-fit business models. Third, set clear guardrails. Translate climate and biodiversity strategies into clear pathways for reduced resource use. And finally, embrace new global collaboration. Transforming systems to use fewer materials is by definition a cross-border process. Increasing resilience does not mean less border exchange, but rather coming together in a strategic international value chain innovation programs. And what could European Union do? Internationally, high-income regions, European Union, of course included, must face the trade dependencies they have helped create and work with exporting countries towards more diverse and locally beneficial economies. They can only maintain a productive and competitive industry at home if their consumption enables a fair and just transition also globally. European Union could lead by reinforcing efforts at home to reduce resource consumption through circular economy approaches and producer ownership models, for example. It could also introduce a fuller perspective of their consumption, for example, through material and consumer footprints per capita, and by complementing resource efficiency with sufficiency policies to stimulate reductions in consumption and demand. European Union could also initiate a conversation with global partners, of course, on the creation of a more formal international forum helping to steward global resource use. These are just some ideas which were more detailed in a joint report by Club of Rome, Systemic and Open Sciences Foundations, titled the International System Change Compass, that provide the tools today for new and transformational leadership at this critical point in time, to which I'm sure Yamide can and will add. So, Sandrine, in short, the way to resource equity and sustainability leads through holding up a mirror to ourselves in the first place. We must stop ignoring the inherent wastefulness of our production and consumption and make also some difficult but essential changes linked to the necessary deep system transformation.
Unfortunately, Yanis couldn't be with us today, and actually we even couldn't bring him in directly because there was no possibility to do that, so we had to do this video. But I would like us now, as we open into this next session that is so important, to hold with us 2 key messages from Yanis. One is everything he has said was in the limits to growth. That's how I started this conversation. Let's remember that that was already 50 years ago. We have to shift from an extractive economy. We need to take into consideration materials. We need to think through our impact. And we need to, as he said so clearly, hold a mirror to ourselves. The high-income countries that are creating this instability, that are putting in place the perverse enabling factors that keep those in low-income countries poor and don't enable them to thrive, not just survive. We are responsible for the future, so clearly said by Yanis, but do we know that we're responsible for the future, even if we admit that we're responsible for the past? That's the question that we'll bring into now this incredible panel. And on Gender Day, I'm so proud that I'm going to be joined by some incredible women on an all-women's panel, all women who are change leaders and game changers in their own right. So I'm going to start off by introducing actually Zakia Katabi, Minister for Climate and Environment, Sustainable Development and Green Deal for the Kingdom of Belgium, my home, and I'm very proud that we have such an incredible woman as our minister. I would then like to introduce Yamid Danier, who is mentioned actually by Janusz, who's been an absolute keen supporter of the work that we've been doing at OSF, and who is here as the Global Director for Climate Justice of the Open Society Foundation. Yamid, please. Oh, if you could just sit right there. Thank you, Yamid. Good to see you. We will be joined by Yasmin Fouad, the Minister of Environment of Egypt, but she, for the moment, is held up somewhere else, but she will be coming. But then, last but not least, two incredible women, Vanessa Terschluss, Chief Editor of Club of Rome's 50% Network, our youth network that we're very proud of. Let's not forget, more than 50% of the globe are women, more than 50% of the globe are youth as well. Very important point. And then Runa Khan, the founder and director of Friendship, and I'm so proud to be on her advisory board, who is doing incredible work across the globe in ensuring, just like Sheila, that those that are on the front lines, community workers, and all those also that are really looking at new solutions are actually part of the solution. So I'm going to start with you, actually, Zakia. Last year during COP26, you spoke about the importance of shifting towards a circular, regenerative economic models. In Belgium, we know that there is now the donut economy that is being introduced in Brussels. And we've seen other very keen new initiatives coming from Wallonia by pledging, for example, its support for loss and damage. What for you are the three key priorities in order to accelerate this transformation that we need? Is it on?
Is it? Yeah, it's okay. No, I think it's okay.
Yes,
yeah, okay.
It is.
Thank you, Sandrine. It's really an honor for me to be here, but it's also very strange. And if you allow me, I will begin with a personal confession. And I must confess that I'm very, well, let's say, uncomfortable. And it's because as a green activist, as intersectional feminist, I should have said each word you say in your introducing words. But as minister, I'm really ashamed when I see how far we are from the transformation we need. And in French, we speak about dissonance cognitive. I don't know how do you say it in English?
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And it's my new way of life from the beginning of my mandate. Really. But it's really a pleasure for me to be here because it's important for us, for me as minister, to stay in touch, to keep in touch with the activists, not only activists, but with people who are in front of the struggle and who, you mentioned it earlier, you said that it's a long time ago that you put on the public table a number of statements who were awaiting us of what will happen if we don't take some measures. And here we are. No one. Well, I think that there were a lot of people who were listening to you, but after that, when we each of us go back to our countries, we forget it. So yeah, well, I will deal with this dissonance cognitive, but I'm very happy to be here today. And let me also express you, Sandrine, it's the first time that I have the opportunity to express you my appreciation to you, but also to your co-president, for your leadership of Club of Rome, standing on the shoulders of your predecessor. You continue to think out of the box, and by showing us other pathways, leaving the current mainstream avenues that are leading towards more and more crisis. And yeah, I think that. Thank you. So thank you very much for that. And imagine a decent future for our children and for our grandchildren following other pathways is as well the driving force of my policy making. And to answer to your question, I think it begins by a governance issue. We there is a huge need to go out from the silo approach. There is a huge need for systemic governance to make sure that decision we take, that measure we take, don't have bad effects on other policies, but also on other people. And as you mentioned it, I'm Minister for Climate, Environment, but also for Sustainable Development. And I use the SDGs as compass for the policies of my government. And so for the first time, also for the climate policy, I've asked to each of my colleagues to align their policies to our climate objective. So we work with 39 roadmaps, I think. I have to, with goals on mid and long term. And we also ask them to align their measures on the SDG to show how they help to achieve a SDG, but also how a measure seems to have bad effect on one or another one SDG. And I think it's maybe the first fundamental step to build a structural answer to the climate crisis without creating the next crisis, which I think will be a crisis around the critical raw materials. And so we have to pay attention that I speak as a European country, that our energy transition, but also transition in general, is not built in the backs of others. We invest a lot on electrification, but without asking from where come the materials that we need, in which condition, and who are the countries who help us for our transition without dealing with theirs. And so I think that for me, the first step is really a governance issue. Well, that said, when focusing on a carbon neutral, environmentally sustainable, toxic-free and fully circular economy by 2050, the European Union should articulate how it will continue to show solidarity with its partner countries in the global south. Within that context, I would like to make a couple of remarks for which I use the different elements in the title of this panel. So ensuring a just global transition means to me complying with the EU's and by extension with the OECD's international engagement when it comes to official development assistance and the additional international climate financing. Preventing negative international spillovers requires a coherent approach of due diligence along the value chains so that we get the ecological and social costs internalized in the price of our goods and services. Opportunities to rethink international collaboration is a more difficult aspect of this debate. When it comes to the multilateral context, we are still dealing with the heritage of World War II, efforts to change composition and voting systems in UN and in Bretton Woods institution haven't led to modification. Neither are the efforts to uplift the importance of UNEP, UNHCR, etc. Rethinking governance models, in my mind, it is linked to the principle of subsidiarity. A governance model should be adapted in function of the most appropriate level of policy making, depending on the nature of the challenge. And last but not least, transformational leadership. I have two comments to make as an input for the discussion. First, Professor Jan Rotmans from the Netherlands writes about transformational leadership in his latest book, the following: the system crisis is a moral crisis and is about leadership, focused on authenticity, vulnerability, connection, and humility. And second, a 50-50 woman-man leadership in a country, an organization, a company, wouldn't it be, in any case, transformational? And I want to conclude how I started with a confession. I love Tamara more than Tina. While Tina stands for "there are no alternatives," the mantra of the current mainstream politics, Tamara stands for "there are many and real alternatives. Thank you for your attention.
Nice, on Gender Day. Absolutely. So let's adopt Tamara politics rather than Tina politics. I love it. Thank you so much, Zakia. And I think you bring up a very good point around governance, and we haven't spoken about governance enough. You also brought forward the Bretton Woods. I mean, we are actually working on beyond Bretton Woods and new governance structures around the institutions. But also in Earth for All, we highlight the importance of democracy and how much we have to hold democracy true, and the importance also of citizen engagement within that democracy, setting up citizen assemblies as we will be doing throughout the world. And that's kind of why I want to come to you, actually, because, my dear Yamid, OSF was set up to ensure that democracy continues to thrive. And you have been an incredibly generous partner in our systems compass, in particular in bringing forward that international lens. How do you see the need for international collaboration to really shift? And taking into consideration what we heard also, that kind of post-colonial thinking, where are the leverage points? What do we need to look at in terms of creating a just, green, and social economy?
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here with you. And thanks indeed, Sandrine, for your leadership and for enabling for a discussion that can be very provocative and to get us out of our comfort zone. It's time, I think, you know, when it comes to collaboration and governance, I think we at OSF, we look into who is going to be in the room, whose verse we're going to hear, who is going to make the decision or influence the decision. So we are thinking also boldly, you know, who needs to be in the next 2 days at the G20? Should it be just the G20 countries, the usual suspects? Should we have the African Union that actually represent maybe the 8th economy of the world? Should we bring actually also on the table the least developed countries, vulnerable nations, where most of our resources, critical minerals, are coming from? So I think it's really how we see and address that power imbalance. And, you know, in addition, I think, you know, what we have heard in this COP, I have attended 14 COPs in my career. And it's, you know, since Glasgow, it was the first time I saw the word debt included into a COP decision. And here at this COP, we heard a lot about, a Bridgetown agenda, talking about fiscal space, talking about issues that generally only happen at the IMF, on the margin of the IMF World Bank, or among the most powerful people. And here, everybody, including the youth, participating in the debate of the Bridgetown agenda, which is really a trigger. It's not as if, you know, everything in there is going to be agreed upon, but it provoked the discussions about, you know, the reform of the Bretton Woods, you know, system, because it has been set up after the World War, the Second World War, and things have changed, and we know that the system is not fit for purpose. It's been built upon, you know, from the lens of extractivism, and set up, you know, processes that unfortunately perpetuate, you know, what countries think are indebtedness. And this is linked to the conversation that we have about also loss and damage, which is about mobilizing and accessing support for, you know, damages, both economic and non-economic, some that we cannot even cost, you know, that do not, with funding mechanisms that actually do not exist yet. And the question is whether what we have is going to be reformed quickly enough to enable those transfer and this funding to really give birth, or do we need actually to fill the gap and create more effective institutions to make this happen? This is a debate, and, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, we approach those issues with consistency. I think you alluded to the fact that we need to change our consumption pattern, and you know, what we've seen since the Russian war in Ukraine is very much, you know, one group of countries saying, yes, you need to decarbonize. Don't use fossil fuel. Don't use oil and gas. But hey, I need it for security reason, for my own consumption. Oh, but I told you that I needed my reserve, what is on the ground, to develop. So what is more important, security, development? We are having those trade-offs, those tensions that very often happen within our own government and that really are exposed between countries. And that has created the lowest level of trust that we see in a COP, actually. And I hope that we will be able to really overcome this, because we need also to look at this issue of consumption and extractivism when we will look into the dash to renewables, and to make sure that when we will, that requires 6 times more critical minerals, that we will not repeat either the same mistakes as for the oil and gas, and that those communities on the front line do not see their land grabbed, and on this issue, the women, those who are very much relying on agriculture and do the job, do not have the legal power and the ownership of the land, and find themselves in a very vulnerable situation, very often threatened. We do have more protectors, land defenders, environmental defenders being killed. So we need to be really, to really looking at, how we bring the values. I think this is, he mentioned, this earlier, how do we see differently, some of those values? So I will stop there because I want to hear my colleagues, but I think it's really the change of mindset, the understanding that, we cannot look at issues in a very holistic manner, and to really have the required consistency, avoid double standards, and create the leadership space, to have the voices that have not been usually at the table to co-design.
Yes.
And I'm so happy that we have engaged, Sandrine, in how to make sure that this journey with the system compass continues by bringing also more perspectives on how this could have been put together, coming from the other side, from our counterparts from the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yamid. I really appreciate that. And for all of you who have not gone on the Club of Rome website, please do, not just to find out who we are, by the way, but because I'm so proud of this systems compass in the same way that I'm so proud of all the publications. But I do believe that this systems compass does give us a compass based on value principles. And looking at leadership, looking at our economies, looking at our financial structures, what types of principles that we need to start to have real value-based decision-making, which brings in, as Janusz called us, that humility and that humanity comes back in really as the central piece for how we can continue to move forward. I want to bring you in now, Vanessa, because you've heard from me as the older generation that 50 years ago we published The Limits to Growth. You're now hearing about all these different publications. You've heard about what Yamid is saying, which is very right. I mean, there is a problem here at this COP. Many of us have noticed it. The discussions that we're having here are not being reflected. We're stuck on damage and loss. We're stuck on the 100 billion. The debt conversation is not yet a reality, even though it's on the table, which is good. How does that make you feel as a young person? I mean, I can tell you how it makes me feel. Sometimes I want to cry, because I was like you, young activist, environmentalist, the same with many of us. How does it make you feel?
I think there's no other way to say it other than really, really frustrated.
Put the microphone a bit closer.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, whenever I think about youth activism, and I think it's a question that I get asked a lot, how can we support you? And I think there's a lot of conversations that need to be had around
funding and around representation, but I always think what we need the most is climate action. What we need the most is for you to push to protect nature. I mean, you mentioned it before, we're now at a COP where we're discussing whether we should be taking 1.5 off the table. We're still seeing very low ambition around CBD COP15. We're still, in a lot of countries, not even seeing our rights to protest and have our voice heard really meaningfully safeguarded. So yeah, it's just really, really, really frustrating. And I mean, I think I would also say, in a way, and me and Haiza were speaking about this before, I would say particularly being a young person from Brazil at this COP feels different, because in a way, for us personally, there is a little bit of hope, because we are finally seeing political leadership that actually does seem to be taking us seriously.
So let's clap that, because that is good news. We now have a Brazilian leader that actually knows the importance of a tree and an indigenous person.
True, exactly. So I think we were even joking. We're like, we feel like as a young Brazilian person, we might be the only group that's a bit delusional walking around COP and being like, we're actually in a good mood. So it does feel good. But I would say, and I would urge, let's get all the countries there. Let's make sure that youth everywhere feels like they can look up to leaders that actually take their futures seriously and that actually bring them hope.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I'm always struck by the incredible wisdom of young women who are fighting the good fight across the globe. Having written a book, as you know, with two other climate activists in Belgium who really went out on a limb with Greta, with Louisa, but also, so this is Anuna and Adelaide, who also very clearly went out on a limb and said, we might be able to stand up for our rights, but so many women across the globe cannot. They cannot miss school. I mean, let's not forget that young people need to have access to knowledge and access to education. Not everybody can actually go out in the street. And in fact, our Russian compatriots, the last time I was on a Zoom call with a Russian activist, he had had to flee Russia because they were trying to capture him and put him in prison, and they stripped him of his nationality. Now, none of us know what it's like no longer to belong to a nation. You may be against what your government is doing, but if you don't have citizenship, you have nothing. Now, luckily, the German government has offered him citizenship. That comes back to the humanity and the humility that we need on this planet in so many ways. I bring that as an anecdote because I think that it turns us very much to a word that I love that's being used in the organization that Runa, you set up, and that is friendship. And friendship has to be the key word. It has to be the fact that we now consider all of us as friends. It goes back to the faith of so many. If we can start to consider that all of our neighbors are friends, no matter how far that neighborhood goes, then maybe we can start to do the right thing, right, Runa? Yes. The microphone will come, don't worry. It's coming? Yes. No.
Okay, now I have it.
There we go. Now we've got it.
Absolutely.
That's
Zakia.
friendship.
So thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm pleased to be here because I think the Club of Rome signifies something very special. It signifies a vision which is not ad hoc, but of the future. And I think this is something which organizations, human beings, the person themselves, even countries need to start looking into. They need to look at the fact with humility that it's nothing is for today. They need to leave the world, a better world for the tomorrow, and it's all in a process. We are all part of a process. And we are not the end. We cannot be the end. Because if we are the end, it doesn't move. Then everything that you do, it comes back to yourself and how much you've got, how much you've gained, how much you have done. that is not how the world can work. So I started Friendship 20 years ago, and it was interesting because I was not from the sector of development at all. I had not even known about the word climate change. And it was totally, for me, all about human beings who were being left behind. And somehow I couldn't understand in a country of 20, 30, 40,000 NGOs, how it was that millions were not being addressed. They were not even written about. And this was, today I discovered, because they're all climate migrants. So actually, it's the empathy which started making me look towards home climate migrants. And trying to ensure that the first step in what a human needs is easing suffering. So everything goes out of the window when you're suffering. I needed to address that, because when you die, you become a statistic, then you fall into somebody's research book, and then you become fine. It goes ahead, not when you're suffering. So that is how I started the organization. And today we are reaching direct service access to about 7.5 million people annually. And when I started, not knowing anything about development, this is where I think what I would today call a vision which somehow has remained as strong as the day I started, which is I understood that the system in which things were working was somehow not going right. Because we needed to make a paradigm shift in the way development was working, in the way the government itself was addressing unaddressed needs. There was just so many things I felt was wrong. In the way organizations were coming in from the first world, the dichotomy of the relationship of North and South. 20 years ago, no one even spoke about localization, but this is what we did. So trying to bring reality to the scene, I jumped over the dichotomy of the North and South and created my own organizations in the West simply because of friendship. I wanted real people to see real things happening on the ground, feel real connections so that there is sustainability. Now, there is also internalization of actions and sustainability. Because when you put the right things in the right time, in the right way, in the right amount, you don't need volumes of money. You don't need volumes of idea. It just needs a snap, and you have it right, people internalize, and sustainability happens. And this is what I've seen over the last 20 years. You know, the world has changed. The world of us knowing, you learning, has gone. That's so colonization, kind of istic view. And it happens in many ways. All of us in this room, we all dislike colonization. We all feel the same towards colonization and what it has left behind. However, it's still going on in a very, very strong way. Going on through the way that development agencies are working, going on in the way that implementation is going on in the way that local communities must become the real front liners of this COP and not kept as a showcase. We are still keeping the frontliners as showcase in the COP. And we're talking about finances, billions of dollars. Nobody needs billions right now. We need to ensure that those people, millions who are suffering today, do not have cases against the companies and the governments who one day they will start feeling that they have been really been neglected by them, or it's their impact. And perhaps that fear that this should not be done may stop it. Perhaps 20 should start having a campaign, having some cases, and that would put the fear into companies, into countries, and perhaps we can tomorrow stop such a lot of total disrespect of this world that we live in. We share this world, as you've very rightly said, we share this world with the plants, the animals, the microbes, the fish, life all around us, the birds, and humanity has taken it all. there needs to be respect. Without respect, how can there be equity? Equity not only in gender, but equity with every single life on this planet. This, unless we start from there, this deep respect, it is so difficult to sit in 3 or 4 steps in the COP and come to a solution. So I think here is something we really need to start, each of us, all of us together work towards.
Thank you so much, Runa. And you haven't even spoken about the incredible projects that you're doing in Bangladesh, but maybe that's for another time, in so many different communities, but also the mangrove communities. And really, it's incredible what you're doing. I love the way in which you brought in equity through respect. And I think it's incredibly important, again, to come back to some of the results that we saw through Earth for All and the system dynamic modeling. I mean, think about it. We took all of the key tensions in our economy and we looked at the planetary boundaries. And of course, if some of you have engaged with some system dynamic modeling, for example, the En-ROADS modeling says you can pull on certain levers. And in particular, for example, you can eliminate fossil fuels. And what will that lever do in terms of decarbonization? Or you can pull on the energy efficiency lever, or you can address the consumption lever. What did our system dynamic modeling show? Not that you need to first focus on pulling on those levers. The biggest lever is ensuring that we stop poverty. The biggest lever is ensuring that we stop inequality. Why? Because then the pressure on the planetary boundaries totally shifts. And of course, the voice that you're saying, the calls for action, stop fossil fuel countries and companies moving forward in terms of the high greenhouse gas emissions coming from our extractive economies and the mining, because that is actually not being properly costed in our economy, and instead is costing us the economy. That is the point. So how can we actually thrive rather than survive? How can we transform our economies so that they truly do take into consideration well-being economics?
I hear you, and I was wondering if we have not to begin with redefine what are our well-being standards, what development means, because we know that the lack of trust, we are facing it on the COP and in other international meetings, is also because some countries who are part of the discussions have the legitimate asking for development. And so if we are not with them in the reflection to know how, in this century, we can develop a country, but not with the recipe of the
recipe. Yeah.
So I think that there's something that we are not dealing with, but I think that we have to collectively redefine what it means to then in the second step maybe give the good solution. But I think that we have to redefine the terms of the debate.
Completely agree, and I would say that actually through Earth for All, where we redefine is that we look at those economic models that do actually put an emphasis on well-being, regenerative, circular economic shifts. We have them. The donut economic model is being adopted across the globe in local communities. We know that the well-being economic model has actually been taken up by well-being governments of New Zealand, Scotland, Finland, Iceland, Wales, Costa Rica, and now Canada. Redefining an economy that goes away from just GDP growth into an equal discussion around economic, social, and environmental indicators. So we have the possibility. We heard from Jan that we have the tools and we have the evidence. What's holding us back, and this is where I think your call as well is so important, Vanessa, and I'd love to have a reflection from you, all three of you, is the fact that these COPs now are getting hijacked. They're hijacked again because to even think that we're questioning 1.5 is unbelievable. That actually this has become a circus for negotiators. That there are so many people out there that are saying enough is enough. We have had so many incredible conversations here at COP, and I love you all, but I'm not here to see you, I'm here to see action. And that is what's starting to piss me off. And we really do need to hold our leaders accountable and ourselves. If we are all here at the next COP, then we are actually part of the problem, unless we declare that we need clear solutions and action, and that the negotiations may lead to something. And that is incredibly important. So what is our clear call? If we were going to have each of you give one clear point that needs to be communicated right now in order for us to show up next year at the UAE, what do we need now from this COP? Yamin. Okay, you can give more.
Thank you. Maybe this one will. Does it work?
Yes.
Thank you. I think there's a number of criteria for first of all, I think the fight and the accountability fight does not stop at this COP. It's before, it's during, and it's after. And I have to say, I don't think that the voices are loud enough to really, call for the outrage, regarding this backsliding. The only thing that has been consistent actually has been the backsliding since COP26. And I think that needs to be called out, loudly. And it's a shame that, we are indeed in a more restrictive space, to do that. But, we need to be creative and really hold, all, and not just governments, but the corporate sector, accountable for this too. But the second is, because of that backsliding, do we really want to, we're backsliding on 1.5, we're backsliding on some of our commitments on finance, we are backsliding, are we going to backslide on our planet Earth now and leave it in a lost and damaged state? I think this is also what is at stake. Are we going to backslide on protecting the most vulnerable communities? And I think, this is why vulnerable, I can tell you, having discussed with some vulnerable countries' representative, last night, they were really down. They were up for the fight until the last hour. But are they going to come home, having backsliding on 1.5 and then no means to really, survive and thrive? Their right not to just survive, but to thrive and bounce back out of, floods, out of, seeing their nations being completely underwater. Who is next after Pakistan? Are we just going to look and see? I think this is really all those questions, and we can't do otherwise. I like, where the friendship here? Where the friendship in this COP? Let's call it out.
Thank you so much, Yamida. I really appreciate that. And thank you. I was with some beautiful indigenous women, and we were doing a prayer for the earth. And one of them said at the end of the prayer, as our earth keeps on warming, our hearts keep on getting colder. So friendship is the only way to make our hearts get warmer. And that is to realize that we are all absolutely dependent on each other. We are as vulnerable as the most vulnerable link, and we are the ones that can bring dignity back onto this planet. Vanessa.
Thank you. I think my call to action, it goes in two layers. I think one is for us as civil society. I mean, working with youth, what I always see is, it makes sense, and we're seeing now at this COP why it makes sense. most of youth feels really disempowered, and I think we're kind of stuck in a moment with activism, and that's not everyone. There are, of course, amazing groups out there that are doing radical work, and we're seeing it at this COP. It's really youth that is really pushing on ambition. But I do speak to a lot of young people that are kind of stuck on this awareness building, and I think around society, we need to move beyond that. We are all aware of the problem. I think we really need to realize that the political system, the way it's sold to us, it's something that is super, super distant from us, but it needs active participation.
Absolutely.
We need to be voting, we need to be protesting, we need to be organizing, we need to be speaking to our representatives. So I think, yeah, I mean, I echo what my colleague said. It just cannot stop at this COP. We need to keep going. We need to be speaking with our communities. So I would say that's the call for us. And when it comes to the organizations, institutions that are here present today, I would say it's all about youth engagement that is not tokenistic. I mean, I think youth has had a really beautiful space at COP. We've seen it with the Children and Youth Pavilion. But unfortunately, in a lot of institutions, there is still a lot of youth washing. There's very little meaningful engagement with youth. There's very little funding to youth. Young people are experts. They're putting their time. They're putting the bodies on the front line. Protesting is not always a safe thing. It's tiring. So I think young people really need to be valued for the work that they do, and they need to be compensated. Also because if we're not doing that, we are closing off spaces for those that don't have the privilege to do unpaid labor. So yeah, I think we really need to continue to push for youth engagement in a way that is not tokenistic.
Thank you so much. And you're not tokens, not in my book in any case. As I said, you're the 50%, right? Hello, time to wake up here. Runa.
Thank you. I think there are two things. One, what is happening there, the decision makers, I think the next COP, the decision makers should be amongst us, and the decisions should be made after they have listened to us, all of us.
Okay, absolutely.
Number one. Number two, this time, for next time, let's ask 20 of the best decision makers after 18th to come and say what have been the best ideas that have stemmed from the blue-green innovation zones. Can any of them repeat one? So what are we doing? What are we doing, you know?
We're reinventing the world, Runa. We're going to do it for them because they clearly don't know what they're doing. So I think that unfortunately Minister Fouad has obviously been taken up. She should be here, clearly, but she hasn't been able to make it. I want to thank you again for your powerful, powerful messages, for speaking truth to power, all of you, including you, Minister, because you're the one who is in the most awkward position. And so your confession was perfect at the beginning. But I don't think you should need to continue to confess. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to bring your mind, your heart, and your soul together as you go into that room and you go into the EU consultation that you have to go and do right now, and bring a little bit of what we've just spoken about with you as you stare the eyes of the other negotiators. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do not go. We're not finished yet. You can go. Yes, please. You guys can leave. Thank you very, very much. So we're not quite finished, but we're almost there. I want to bring forward, actually, by my incredible partner in crime and co-author of a book that I wrote in Belgium, Anuna, who actually has been working with UNICEF to put together a very poignant film around their perspective of climate change. And I felt it was important to show all of you what they have done and what they feel, because they are not here at COP and their voice is so important. Anuna is our climate activist in Belgium alongside with Adélie Charlier, And what's beautiful about this story is that Anuna comes from Flanders, our Dutch-speaking region, and Adelaide comes from our French-speaking region. And they came together through a beautiful friendship. When Anuna started protesting and becoming an activist, Adelaide found out and said, we have to do this together. Because believe it or not, our political leaders keep on telling us that actually the Flemish part is different from the French part, and we all live in this tiny little country. And yet somehow they don't understand the word friendship. But these two girls did. And together with Princess Esmeralda, who, by the way, has been accused as a colonialist because she is actually the daughter of King Leopold, not the one who was the colonialist, she has also shown her incredible understanding of her past in showing, also in being part of friendship, but in showing her friendship and working with indigenous people and foundations across the globe. And so together the four of us tried to break through the intergenerational disconnect. And that is why I felt it was so important, Anuna, who's been struggling to find a place to show her film, that I should show her film today to bring that voice into this room. So I don't know if the film is ready and if we're able to show it. I hope it is.
I am Najma Noor Omar.
I am Wendy Ahonda.
I am Hans Richard.
Outside of the conferences and negotiations, we need the world to see what the climate crisis really looks like. The people of South Sudan have been surviving emergencies that most of the world hasn't heard of and couldn't imagine.
We are not a statistic in a report. We are people
living in a crisis we didn't create.
You see this flooding here, it has caused the loss of many things. Our life here depends on livestock. So we depend on livestock, goats, cow, chicken, that all stuff, and they are all dead. We don't have homes. The ones who are here, they don't know where they can go. What can you do to them? What are you going to do to those people who has been displaced by flood?
With almost 9 million people affected and on the brink of survival, half of which are children.
The situation in South Sudan is catastrophic.
But it's not just in South Sudan.
Huge parts of Africa have become mostly unlivable.
There is no way to predict when the floods will come and how severe they will be. Extreme weather events make food production impossible.
The sickness is too much in this flood. We are all sick, and we also have a hunger because the flood destroyed everything.
This is a result of humanity's exploitation
of our planet's resources and each other. It is crucial that we listen to the voices of the people on the front line.
The floods in South Sudan has displaced millions of people
and caused massive loss of lives and livelihoods.
Daman war piazza penya waka yepur pure ya wakony kuma na chin ke be pur so yena piazza ada wacha galle charit
chan cha walk cha ba walk si so kana chan wale ja rede or yen ke beto ka nwan walk ben ke ga bu le we chan ina bu ka jar bai ni.
Children make up over half of the communities affected by the climate crisis.
It is stated that if you educate a girl, you have educated a nation. This issue of earlier marriage is not good for our girls. Let your girls educate so that you will have a better future. There are some of the children who are now at home. They have the interest of coming to school, and it is because of some crisis of climate and lack of other resources. For the whole world and Africa and South Sudan, I would like to say that take your children to school so that they have a better future tomorrow.
There is a brief window of time to avoid the very worst of the climate crisis.
But the world is dangerously off track.
We need to stop pretending that we have time.
Because we don't.
The world's most polluting economies are addicted to fossil fuels. Their leaders mostly talk about economy and technology. They forget about people losing their lives, loved ones, and livelihoods.
This crisis is fueled by inequality.
Current policies are driving our world to at least 2.5 degrees global warming.
This is not a world that we can live in.
Pledges at climate conferences are not enough. Resources and solutions must reach all affected communities. We need more solutions for climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damages.
They must be binding.
Affected countries should not go into debt for a crisis they did not create.
We need a seat at the table.
Climate justice is the only way forward.
I don't know about you, but I'm incredibly moved every time I see that film. Whew. And it reflects everything we've been talking about. Sorry. So now we're going to try to have a conversation. And clearly, sometimes we have to cry, right? It's pretty overwhelming. But we can't wallow in our tears, because then we can't look at them in the eye. And especially those of us who are in high-income countries. I'll get my shit together. Okay. So, what are your thoughts? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm from Stop Ecocide International. And
another beautiful movement. Thank you so much for everything that you do.
You're welcome. Thank you for what you do. I was in a side event a couple of days ago with the UNFCCC asking about what we should do for COP28. And I just said it's pretty straightforward. You don't let any country attend unless they ratify ecocide as a fifth international crime. Otherwise, what the hell are you doing here? Mm. And the lady looked a little bit shocked. But I stand by it. Our founder, Jojo Metha, who's an extraordinary woman.
Yeah.
You can get me crying now.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Talks about us getting ecocide as the fifth international crime within 5 years. And I think that's too late. Mm-hmm. I've made a
Yeah. So if we can't cry in this circle of trust, then we can't cry amongst each other, right? I mean, that's true friendship, right, Runa? We need to be able to cry. We need to be able to feel the pain. And I would say that I think 1.5 and ecocide have to go hand in hand. We are our greatest existential risk, we as humanity, and you're absolutely right. We need to declare ecocide.
I made a promise to my kids that I'll do everything to make it happen in 2 years. And we can do it. It just has to, put everyone's big boy and girl pants on.
Yeah.
And make it happen.
Thank you. I agree. And building on that, I've gotten through this week, and I know I have my good friend Gonzalo here, and you're going to get to do some concluding remarks. This is not the same presidency as either the UK presidency or the Chilean presidency, and the incredible work that the climate champions did to try to bring some of these issues to the table. But I'm going to look at all of you in the eyes, and if I don't see a change, I will not attend the next COP. And yet I have attended the last 10. Because it's time for us not to be complicit in this madness. We cannot be part of this circus if it continues to actually backslide exactly as you declared up here. We are backsliding. So, does someone else want to come in with a reflection, a question, a thought?
I think it's so emotional watching the film, and we need the leaders to go and see these places and to meet the people on the ground. You know, there was Leaders' Quest before, like we should get every leader to go to one of those places and meet the families and actually see what's happening. And I also think there is no way we should be having the next COP where it is. I mean, it's just crazy. We should be going to the leaders. We should either be going to the nations that are leading on climate change, like Costa Rica and others, or we should be going to the places that are most affected so that people are there to see it and then can see the stories. Because it's just absolutely diabolical that we're going to support a nation that is completely committed to fossil fuels. It just shouldn't happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I think we need to write letters to the UNFCCC. I think we need to write letters to the governments. I think we need to rise up and very clearly indicate this. Because we are facing a situation in the same way as which, by the way, I don't know if some of you heard that the next Olympics will actually be organized during the winter in one of the warmest countries on this planet, in Saudi Arabia. I think there is a slight difficulty in organizing, not that I am against, and I've worked with the Saudis, not that I'm against Saudi Arabia, but what is the signal that we're giving to the world when actually we're organizing an Olympic Games in the winter in one of the warmest places that we know of? That just isn't right. Someone else that has a reflection?
I just wanted to add something that I forgot to say up there. You might have heard enough from me already, but I think, and I mean, you mentioned it already, Sandrine, I think we really must commit to 1.5. Attending another COP that has let 1.5 slip through the sides, it's just absolutely neglecting anything that we stand for, and it's just completely betraying all the future generations.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. So we have to stick to 1.5. We need to address ecocide. We need to make our leaders accountable. Runa.
We really need to change the modality totally. This is not working. This is just not working. So I don't know. I don't have a solution. But certainly we need to come together, as you suggested, write, do something, or everyone not go to COP. Just stop COP. You know?
Yes.
Forget about the blue zone. Who listens to us on the green zone? You know? So, I don't know.
Well, yesterday
We
I was
need
in the
drastic
sea and I
things
felt
to be
like that
done.
was the real blue zone.
Absolutely.
We need to rename the sea our blue zone. We have here, and well, first I guess there, and then Are you representing the minister? Okay, then please, you can come up. I didn't realize that the minister sent a representative, so thank you for coming. And then we will have Gonzalo say the closing remarks. Maybe we have one last remark from here, and then let me pass you a microphone.
Thank you.
I think it should be on. You just need to speak into it. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Please.
So, yeah, thank you for inviting us, and I would like to convey the best regards of Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad for not be able to be joining us today. I'm Ali Abu Sinna. I'm the CEO of the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency and Minister Assistant for International Projects. So I'm happy to be with you to give you a message from the COP27 that we were working over the last 11 months to gather all international community representative here. So we were thinking about the slogan for this COP27, and we didn't find better than more going for implementation. We have been more than 15, 20 years negotiating, speaking, and nothing happened at the ground to fight the climate change. It's very clear that the most vulnerable countries are the developing countries. They are very affected, and at the same time, they are the main resources for raw material, for water, for energy. So they are looking more or less for adaptation rather than mitigation. So this is why we were argue the leaders to support the negotiators and communities and other participants for some aspects to be highlighted. First, global goal for adaptation. We have to set this global goal for adaptation. We have to work together on the adaptations and the implementation of adaptation. Financing mechanism to be transparent and to be already allocated to the most vulnerable countries. This is a crucial. We have to act right now. There is now no doubt about the impact of the climate change. It is happening everywhere. In Europe, burning of forests, floods in Pakistan. You will see a lot of impact is going on. There is a new terminology have been developed right now called the environmental security, based on the climate impacts. So now we can sign conflicts between countries on the scarcity of water, scarcity of food. So this is happening right now, and we have to react very quickly. So this is the message that we would like to highlight and push forward. Going for adaptation, going for finance, transparency of finance, transfer of technology to countries that they would like to really be part and adapt with the climate change. This is something very crucial as a hosting country for COP27. So this is something that we were arguing for the first time. We were putting loss and damage into the agenda of the climate change. This will never happen before, and it was really a lot of reluctance to do this, but now it's a fact. It is in the agenda, will be more discussed, so and more more elaborated. So what I would like to say also, what is very important to react to the climate change, you have to be more innovative in our solution. We have to find the appropriate solution, natural-based solution, whatever it is, should be really highly supported. So we urge the leaders to push the negotiations at the ground, because now it is much cheaper to work other than the disasters will coming very, very soon. So this is why I'm happy to be with you today, to give you the overview the message from COP27 that Egypt with gathering countries to work together now from commitment for implementation. This is the way that we can all feel as citizens worldwide. We need to have a real action at the ground. This is something very crucial. All economists and have been modeling this. They said, if you are not doing it right now, if you are not turning the climate change into the opportunity for investment, it will be much, much expensive in the future to be in this earth. So it's our earth. Would like to be really reacting very quickly, and this is the message that we would like to transfer to all countries. And you can say how 121 leaders will be here in Egypt. We have more today, more than 40,000 participants are there. We are happy that all discussing this. It's a common value, it's a common future, and it's a whole responsibility, but differentiated between developing and the developed country. But by the end, either to be on this earth, either to not to be able to continue with this. So this is the message I would like to share with you, and thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much. May I ask you just a couple of questions? So you came in at a very emotional time because we just saw a film in South Sudan, young people indicating that their voices are not being heard by the negotiators. We also heard from everyone that 1.5 is the basis. It cannot be renegotiated. That we have to stop just talking. If this is truly going to be the implementation COP, and I know that's what you want it to be, we have to see progress in the negotiating room. Most of us that have participated in this COP are feeling that actually the negotiators have forgotten that the planet is burning. What is your feeling about this?
Exactly. I'm coming from the country which was most vulnerable to the climate change. We are really in a danger to lose our delta. Delta is a feedstock to the Egyptian. So this is something we can feel it very much. This is why I'm saying we have to bridge this gap between the negotiators and the leaders. There have to be a political will and transfer your voices for NGOs, for other non-governmental parties, that we are in a very critical situation. And this is the role. As a host country, we have to be unbiased, as you know, by the hosting. But what we try to do to explain and give the giver figures and say how it's very difficult for us to be in this situation. We are representing Africa, by the way, but in this COP. So we have a crucial situation. We are looking for more adaptation. I'm not saying about mitigation. Even to be alive, you need adaptive. And as you know, the adaptation, it is not a bankable project. It's just to protect yourself, to protect the delta, just to be alive, not just to mitigate the carbon, CO2 or whatever. So this is what we try very, very strongly to push in this way as a hosting country for COP27, as a developing country, most vulnerable country. So I are on your side to reach this, and this has to be stopped. They have to listen to this. With your effort, with our effort, I think we have to come to one way for moving forward. Otherwise, it will not be happening.
Thank you very much, and thank you for making the time, for being with us. May I ask my dear friend, Gonzalo Munoz, who's been with us the whole time. Yes, did you want to say something? Please.
I am Jihan from Egypt. I'm expert of intellectual property, IPR protection. Thank you for your speech. She was nice, and everyone was great. We cry with you, but without without our heart, I cry with you. I think we have solution because we are the section in innovation. So our solution is innovation, innovation, innovation. Two kinds of innovation. The first one, we must don't give innovation for anything, any material, any product counter the climate. This is very important because if you go very far from the past, you will find many innovation. She make many bad things for the climate, and we don't have the experience. It's like they make tests for the people, for Oman. Second thing, we must create a new innovation friend with climate to think outside the box. Because if we think all the world is think inside the box, we will not make nothing. But we try to encourage the innovator person. He can make innovation friend with the climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And let's remember that innovation is not just technology. Innovation is we need to be innovating in our economies, across systems, our financial system. We need to bring in technology. We need to ensure that we enhance people's lives and livelihoods for people, planet, and prosperity. And this is a perfect juncture to bring in Gonzalo, because Gonzalo was elected a climate champion. And what was the role of the climate champions through the Marrakesh Partnership? It was to do just that, to start to think through what are the innovative pathways? What can we do? How can we look at new thinking outside of the box? The beauty of the relationship between the Chilean and also the UK government in setting this up was a deep friendship, because I know that you and Nigel became very close. And from that friendship came so much new thinking. So Gonzalo, you've been here, and I appreciate the fact that you've been here the whole 2 hours. What are some of your thoughts in terms of what you've heard? What for you is transformational leadership and a transformational economic model? It'll come.
Thanks so much, my dear friend. And yes, we have a very nice bromance with Nigel, and we're proud of that, on how we can show a very, sometimes even improbable way to work with the friendship in the center. I would say that new type of transformation has been quite well reflected in this last 2 hours. We heard about, only here in the panel, 9 women, I'm the 3rd male.
Yoo-hoo!
And Mr. here was replacing another woman that should have been here. So it should have been 10 in relation to 2. And that's not only, I mean, it's great to see that in the Gender Day. Yeah. Fantastic. It's great to demonstrate that we have amazing female and gender diverse leadership. Some of the panels were really amazing in terms also of different cultures, different origins, different perspectives from where they're speaking. And that is not cosmetic at all. One of the most important transformations that we have to do. You mentioned it. Of course, you mentioned also the 50% that is related to youth. I will start with the 50% that is related to gender.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is really important. And I would say, and I mean, we know it. The world would be very different if we were ruled by women in terms of care, in terms of the relationship. Then I'm reflecting on other aspects that I don't know how to manage it, but I mean, it was a really touching moment. And I was realizing, well, maybe it would be hard for me to have such a deep, profound, honest, emotional conversation in a language that is not mine. And that's also something to take into consideration. We are also expected to speak in English, or even in the 6 languages of the UNFCCC. And I was privileged to learn English. But honestly, I cannot express myself with the same fluent capacity that I have in Spanish. And that also represents a difficulty or something that we need to transform in terms of definitely solving that linguistic gap is really important. Of course, so in that sense, in the transformation that we require, I feel like an imposter here. But I would love to reflect on certain aspects that were really, really critical. The main tension that I perceive is, of course, as Runa was saying, like we need to, this system is not working, and yourself is like, I'm not gonna go to another COP if this doesn't show the impact that we require. Well, I don't know if we're gonna have such level of change. I mean, the United Nations works in a way that is supposed to be allowing every country, rich and poor, developed and developing, to express themselves under the same rules. And that requires a very intrigued mechanism for that not to just get simplified, because we know the simplifications will mean that the power will step in top of the most vulnerable ones. Or that's the assumption, right? So I understand that we tend to think that there's nothing happening there, and that only bureaucrats and people that are only taking care of very complex text, and maybe that's part of the reality. But I don't know if generating some parallel, not connecting mechanism will take us anywhere better, right? So I think that we also have to be much smarter, again going into language, which is their language. So what would we have to do for them to be much more interested on what is happening here? And there are certain very structural reasons. We're here outside of the blue zone, whether you like it or not. That's the place where they negotiate. And we are here invited to be participating in their meeting. They are the ones deciding what needs to happen, and they are the ones that held that power. So either we have like a kind of revolution, or we reflect on how to change our own narrative to speak in the language that they require to understand that this so-called the real world has something to offer. And thank you. And many times we're thinking that, no, they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, because we're in the real economy and in the real world. We're suffering the consequences of what they haven't solved. Those are humans, people like us. They have their problems, their difficulties, and most of them, let's assume even all of them, are here because they care about this. They have, of course, their national agendas, personal agendas. They have things that they have to take into consideration, and sometimes they are ruled by their bosses, right? So let's be much smarter. We were having a conversation when we entered this room with Johan. How can we allow those people to understand that we are here because we want to help them? It's not that we want to smash the reality in their faces. We want to help them. As you said, Runa, we want them to know that there's so many things that they haven't seen. And it's just how to bridge that gap, right? And in some cases, sure, the champions are there to support that. But you know what? Sometimes it's just about speaking the language of the process. You have to know what is the term that is being discussed that might connect what their concerns with your concerns, and bring it in the condition, in the moment, in the situation that will allow them to consider that as part of the text. So just to handle that frustration, right? So why are we here in the innovation zone and the green zone and the blue zone? We're on just one planet and we have that tool. Let's use it in a much smarter way. But then the rest is, what do we do on a daily basis? How do we change the lives of those people as well, right? So it reaches to a moment when I say, okay, and what happens if they don't progress? Will they stop us from doing what we have to do? No. We held a lot of power. You are people that are really influential, all of us. are privileged people that have a capacity of changing the world in many, many ways, many interactions. We know others. So let's not blame a civil servant that is trying to do the work the best possible way, and let's think what we can do much better. I'm not saying we haven't done a lot of effort, right? So I'm not only going to COP28, I'm taking my youngest daughter. I want her to be with me, and I want her to see how much we too can do together in order to change the reality. So in that sense, I think, of course, there are many things happening. Honestly, I am as frustrated as you are for many things that we perceive that are not progressing in the right way. But I'm also extremely excited of having Brazil back. Extremely excited.
Yeah, I am too.
And it's not just having Brazil because I had a problem with the current president. It's mostly because I know the influence that they will have into one of the most important regions of the world. It's not only about having the capacity of all of us sharing our thoughts and interests of preserving and enhancing the richness of the Amazon, but also you cannot even imagine how the importance that will have also in the rest of Latin America, in the rest of the world. That will allow us to, let's celebrate the 4 years we have ahead. So each of you, what are you going to do with Brazil? How are you going to help Brazil to progress? Brazil to take this moment to be leading the world. Let's expect that Brazil will help COP30 when it comes back to Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think that we are in the moment of this transformational leadership that requires that connection with the global challenges, and we have to understand them, not just judge them, not just try to interpret them, understand them, right? And some things we don't like, but let's understand them. Then, of course, I think that every single leader in the world should be validating the evidence and the science that lays behind us, right? It's not just what I'm perceiving. There's evidence, like everything that we saw, not only the videos, probably all of us are confronting that evidence day by day, and let's keep bringing the evidence and the science into our narrative. Then I think that it's important for all of us to know very properly what are the tools that we have and how they work. It's not just, oh yeah, I think that this is something cool. There are some batteries and there's some isolation mechanisms. No, go deep and try to understand how they work. So try to combine the tools in order to understand the importance of interconnectivity or interrelationship between humans, between technologies, between challenges, between regions, right? Know the tools and then, oh, okay, so this relates to another one. Finally, I think that it's important that we ask leaders to work on themselves as well. It's not just knowing the goals and what is happening in the world, knowing the evidence and science, knowing how the tools work, then how you work, how you react, how you operate, what are your fears, what are your concerns, what moves you, what touches you, and how you can bring really the best version of yourself through empathy, through generosity, and through compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Beautifully said. Absolutely beautifully said. And I think that as someone who has worked with the oil and gas sector for 10 years, worked for now the current King of the United Kingdom of England, sorry, not the United Kingdom of England. Oh boy, that was a bad one. Who has actually worked for the UN, I can say that absolutely we need to understand, all of us, the different perspectives. And I loved your point on language, because it's so true. Not only do we need to understand that so many people are forced to speak a language that's not their own, but also the importance of the way in which we express ourselves, and the language that we use is fundamental in convincing people that this is the right way forward. Compassion, respect, and dignity
And I always say when people ask me, how did you work with a prince, now a king? He had a mother. He has siblings. He has to go to bed at night. He wakes up like we do, and he still has to go to the toilet like we all do. He is a human being. Every single human being knows what it's like to be a human being. It's just some forget that actually they are part of an ecosystem and that they are dependent on that ecosystem too. So our role is to remind everyone how important their lives are within that ecosystem. And that comes back to the compassion and the dignity. And I agree with you. I really, really hope that we will all go to COP with our heads held high, supporting our leaders so they understand once again why this is so fundamental. Give them the tools and the toolbox that they need to make the right decisions so that we don't waste any more time. We all deserve that. The world's most vulnerable deserve that. And our planet, most of all, Mother Earth, deserves that. So I'm going to bring in all of those empty chairs, the indigenous people that are not here, the vulnerable people that are not here, the voices of the youth that we heard, the voices of the youth that were here, the incredible women that are on the front lines, the leaders that are sticking their necks out, so many policy leaders that do stick their necks out, and those that have not been able to have a voice. And I hope that you can hear those voices in your head as we move out and remind others to hear those voices. And let me thank Laura, my colleague, who has really helped us pull all of this together. Let me thank Sophie, who gave us this opportunity, and Kite for bringing us here today. And let me thank all of you for crying with me and supporting my tears. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, Gonzalo. There's not much to add after so many words of wisdom, but I just really want to thank you, Sandrine, for holding the space the way you did. You brought your incredible expertise, energy, emotion, and by doing so, you allowed us to all feel the way we feel. So thank you for that. And Gonzalo, for a man here on Gender Days, I think you showed an amazing amount of intelligence, emotional intelligence, and enable us to channel that pain that we all feel, and inviting us to use that pain in deepening understanding of how we can best meet people where they are. So thank you for that incredible candor and wisdom. So again, join me in thanking Sandrine and her speakers for this incredible panel.